Okay, shall we sing?
Yeah, let's do it.
Page 128. 1, 2, 8. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov shevet achim gam yachad. Pick either part. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good to see you out here in the beautiful, beautiful Madison evening. It's lovely to be with community, to be among friends, old and new, visitors, special guests. So happy that we have our scholar in residence here, my friend and my mentor, Rabbi Danny Zemel and Louise Zemel, coming to us from Washington, D.C. You're going to love them when you get to know them, which you are going to get to do very soon. Shabbat is an encounter. It's an encounter between the people Israel and God. It's an encounter between our truest selves, our most relaxed selves, and the liberation from the things that the week throws at us to distract us from those selves. It's an encounter of the weekday meeting with the eternal possibility. The chance for us to contemplate the things that are beyond the normal, the chance to feel elated and think about big things. We're going to think about a few big things this weekend, I have a feeling, because Danny Zemel can't be here and without us thinking about a few very important big things. I couldn't be more excited about those encounters. And one encounter that's very special on Shabbat is, of course, the encounter of friends old and new as we gather together as a TBT family. So I encourage everybody to find somebody near to them who they haven't yet said Shabbat Shalom to and just offer the greeting of your choice on this beautiful evening. Well, some of us are at Shabbat services every week, and for others of us, this may be the very first Jewish prayer service that we have ever attended, and it's wonderful that all of you are here, regardless of which camp you're in or anywhere in between. Just to give a little bit of a rules of the road, we have this prayer book, which we'll be following along in. If you have one of the thinner ones, it has brackets at the bottom of the pages. Those are the page numbers that you're going to be following if you have one of the thinner ones. If you don't have any brackets, you don't have to worry about it at all because you're going to be following those page numbers. And as I always remind people, the Hebrew helps the prayer elevate, but the Hasidic masters teach us that what really gets the prayer up into the highest heavens is the nigun, is the melody. So whenever we sing, please sing along. It makes the prayers ascend. Or else they're like lead balloons, the masters say, and they sink to the bottom. But I can tell with this community, those balloons are going to be flying high. We're looking forward to sharing a beautiful Shabbat service, which will begin by lighting the candles. And Jill Lesage, would you please come forward to lead us in the blessing? Watch the cable behind you, okay? No tripping. Would you like to read in the mic first so everybody on Zoom can hear you? Yes, and this way all of our friends on Zoom will be able to hear too. Perfect.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all those who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us, as their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Beautiful. Amen.
And amen.
We're on page 120.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner Shel Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Mwah.
Shabbat Shalom.
The Shabbat encounter, to keep with that theme, begins, according to the ancient sages, with an inspection by the angels, the ministering angels who come to look at the table and say, is it set? Is it beautiful? And we're so lucky to have a beautiful set table, and actually several beautiful set tables. So I want to say a big thank you to Gary for all of your hard work in making that come to fruition. As that set table, that sense of a new possibility comes in every Shabbat, and especially as Jill and Donna and Gary have worked so hard to make this Shabbat special, we feel the presence of those angels among us. We continue welcoming those angels with Shalom Aleichem on page 142.
Shalom Aleichem Malachei Hasharet
Malachei Elyon
Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu
know we know this by now. Let's all sing. Yai, da, 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 da. Yai, da, 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 da.
Zeitchem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon, mi melech malachei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu.
The medieval mystics who crafted this Kabbalat Shabbat service had in mind to conceive of the relationship, the encounter with God, as one of two lovers coming together in this blissful reunion. And they loved, therefore, quoting the Song of Songs, the love poem du Force in the Bible. It is a beautiful poem, in fact, a poem that is so racy that if it weren't in the Bible, you wouldn't believe that it could be in the Bible. And one of the concepts from that love poem is that my heart is awake even though I am asleep. Ani yeshena v'libi er. My heart is awake even when I am asleep. Kol dodi dofek. The voice of my beloved knocks. To me, that verse just cries out with the special wonder of love. The idea that we can somehow be awake even though we're sleeping. Has anybody ever had a lucid dream? A lucid dream. I've always wanted to have a lucid dream, and I've heard you can even train yourself to have a lucid dream. But I have never succeeded in having a lucid dream. But I imagine that's what those verses are referring to. The sense of just elation and joy and love that feels almost too good to be true, like you're in a different world. And while you're in it, Kol dodi dofek, the voice of my beloved knocks just beyond. That's the sense of encounter that this poem, Lecha Dodi, draws our hearts toward. And so at the end, when we've built up all of this energy and singing, we turn toward the other end of our space as we symbolically welcome the Shabbat bride into our midst, as that beloved comes to meet us. Page 138.
B'nei Shabbat nekabel lecha dodi yadadadai likrat kala yadadadai b'nei Shabbat nekabel Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad yishmi'anu el hamiuchad Adonai echad u'shemo L'shem u'tiferet ve'litilah Yadadadadai lecha dodi. Come, my beloved, let's go out. Yadadadadai likrat kala. To greet the bride of Shabbat. Yadadadadai b'nei Shabbat. B'nei Shabbat nekam
Verse 2, Likrat Shabbat.
Likrat Shabbat. Likrat Shabbat. Lechu v'nelcha. Ki mekor haberacha. Mirosh mikem, mirosh mikedem. Nesucha sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Yai-dai-dai, yai-dai-dai-dai lecha dodi. Yai-dai-dai-dai likrat kala. Yai-dai-dai-dai b'nei Shabbat. Shabbat nekavela.
Verse 3, Mikdash Melech.
Mikdash melech, Ir melucha, Kulitzei mitoch avecha. Shevet ve'ekamacha ve'u yachamo
Aleichem na.
Yalalai lecha dodi. Yalalai likrat kala. Yalalai b'nei Shabbat. B'nei Shabbat nekavela.
Verse 5, Hitoreri.
Hitoreri, 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 hivaorech, kumi uri, 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 Shir daveri kivod Adonai, alayich nigra. Yalalai, yalalai likrat dodi. Yalalai likrat kala. Yalalai b'nei Shabbat. B'nei Shabbat nekavela.
We rise and face the rear of our space to welcome Shabbat.
Boi v'shalom.
Moi v'shalom.
Ateret balam.
Ateret balam.
Nam
Simcha.
b'solam. Tochem unei.
Am segula.
Boi
Boi chala. Yalalai lecha dodi. Yalalai likrat kala. Yalalai b'nei Shabbat. B'nei Shabbat nekavela.
We can all have a seat. unless your name is Amanda or Chris. You may not know, but we have a wedding couple in our midst. Yes, that's where ululation is approved. Come on up, guys. You can stand right here between us, okay? I got to meet these guys for the first time, really, I would say, in depth yesterday. And we had a nice chat. In fact, we had such a nice chat that I was doing the meeting from home, and they shared with me about their passion for working with animals, for veterinarian work, which they do and which they share together and support each other in that work. And they were so patient with me that they let me introduce my cat, Charlie, and I got to meet their dogs. I didn't know if the dogs were going to be here. I understand it might not have been the right decision, and that's okay. And I learned that they have a beautiful passion and tenderness for caring for creatures, which is a tenderness that I could really appreciate, and I know that they share for one another, caring for one another in their sacred bond, which is to be formalized in just a couple of weeks in their marriage. So we're very happy that that tender love can be celebrated in so many ways, including with a special blessing here tonight. So Amanda and Chris, I would invite you to face each other and hold hands. As you take one another by the hand, I want you to consider your hands. Take a look down at them for a second. You might not usually take a second to do this, but these are the hands of your best friend. Young and strong and full of love, full of care and the ability to care for others, to care for animals, to care for human beings, and to care for one another. These are the hands that you will be holding on your wedding day in just a couple of short weeks, as you promise to love one another every day, including on your wedding day, but more importantly, every single day throughout your lives together. These are the hands that will work alongside yours, literally and figuratively. As I understand, you sometimes share a shift, right?
Yes.
These are the hands that will passionately love you and cherish you throughout your years together. These are the hands that will hold you when fear or grief fills your mind. These are the hands that countless times will wipe tears from your eyes. Tears of sorrow, tears of joy. These are the hands that, God willing, will tenderly hold your children. These are the hands that will help you to hold your family as one. These are the hands that will give you strength when you need it. And lastly, these are the hands that, even when wrinkled and a little bit older than they are now, will still be reaching out for yours, still giving you the same unspoken tenderness with just a touch. Amanda and Chris, in the presence of our TBT community on this Shabbat evening, in the presence of your families, which I see there, Sheping Nachas, I'd like to offer you this blessing. Misha Berach Avotenu v'Imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu Yivarech et hachatan ve'et hakala v'yatzliach et darkam asher yelchu bach mihayom v'hal'ah yachdav yimtzeu tamid chen v'chesed be'enei kol ro'eineihem v'yizku livnot bait be'Yisrael l'shem ulitila v'hi shalom be'vetam v'shalva v'hashket libotam kol yamim asher hem chayim al ha'adama et shoshvinim ve'et kol yoshvim po. Hu yivarech b'chol hatov v'yarich yamehem be'einayim v'yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol ma'asa yedehem in kol Yisrael achihem v'nomar amen. May God, who blesses all of our ancestors in Israel in every generation, bless also this bride and this groom, as together God guides them on life's journey. May their marriage be a joy and a good example to all who know them. May they fashion a Bait Ne'eman B'Yisrael, as I understand they are already building together, a beautiful and faithful Jewish home that is worthy of praise, a secure refuge, where they will find tranquility during all their days together. May the love of this couple inspire and bless their family their friends, the TBT family, and the whole community of Israel. As together we say,
Amen.
Amen. And I understand also Cantor has a special blessing she would like to offer you at this time.
Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Yaher Adonai panav v'elecha v'chunecha.
Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Yisa Adonai panav v'elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Shalom.
Ken Yehi Ratzon. And Amanda and Chris, that means, may God bless you and keep you. May God shine on you, giving you grace. And may God care for you, blessing you with the greatest of all Jewish gifts, which is the blessing of shalom, of peace, in your home, in your marriage, and throughout your lives. Siman tovu, mazel tovu, mazel tovu, siman tov, siman tovu, mazel tovu, mazel tovu, siman tov, siman tovu, mazel tovu, mazel tovu, siman tov. Yehelanu, 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 u'lecho Yisrael. Yehelanu, yehelanu, u'lecho Yisrael. Yehelanu, yehelanu, u'lecho Yisrael. Yehelanu, yehelanu, u'lecho Yisrael.
Thank you so much.
Mazel
Thank you
tov.
very much. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Consider this the beginning of the party.
Yeah.
Is that you literally showering them with kisses, Lauren? Thank you, and I think Wally heard that, so he thanks you too. Well, after that beautiful encounter, it feels like a joy to enter into our Ma'ariv service with the Baruch Hu on page 146. We invite everybody to please rise.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
We can be seated as we continue with a blessing for the evening and the changes of time and tide. Page 149, we'll read together at the top of the page in English. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravim. For Torah, page 150. Ahavat olam beit Yisrael imcha ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limadata. Akein Adonai Eloheinu b'shochvenu u'v'kumenu nasiach b'chukecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratcha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed. Ki hem chayenu v'orech yameinu v'hem nehegeh yomam v'layla v'ahavatecha tasir mimenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. Page 152.
Shema
Yisrael
Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Leolam Vaed.
Page 154.
ואהבת
את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך. ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
אדוני אלוהיכם אמן.
We just last week celebrated the holiday of Shavuot, and on Sunday when we brought in the holiday together, we had 7 beautiful confirmation students stand up, read from Torah, recite the 10 Commandments from the Torah in the original, and share about their own personal journeys. They did so reenacting that mythical moment in Jewish memory when our people stood at Sinai's foot, looked up in expectation, and agreed. They received Torah and said yes. They said yes. This was not so long after they were freed, so they were a little bit unsure whether they could trust. And there was this little incident of the golden calf, which I sometimes allied when sharing this story. So it's a little bit of a messy journey to covenant. It's a difficult path to trust. And it also shows that freedom is not worth anything unless it's subject to an agreement. Freedom with no limitation leads to chaos. Freedom with no limitation doesn't allow life to go on meaningfully. And that's so whether you are the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau establishing the basis for the modern nation and the rule of law, or whether you're in the Bible and sharing a story about how newly freed people needed to have a sacred agreement of how to live that would not only be a rule that they could follow, but a way that their lives would be elevated through a sacred agreement with God. And so when we sing the song of liberation, we sing also the song of selected limitation, of the need for us to agree to certain things so that our lives will be improved and that our children's lives will be improved. The Song of Freedom is a complicated one in Judaism. It is one of celebration and opportunity, and it's also one of recognizing what the costs are of freedom. And so we join together in that song. Mi Chamocha on page 158. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, גאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. Praised are you, Adonai, who redeemed Israel. On page 161, let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Wow. Would that this were the case in our country. Let there be love and understanding among us. And perhaps as we sing these words, we are singing these words, right?
We are.
Perhaps as we sing these words, we can all think of one way, not on the national level, but perhaps just in our lives, that we can actualize these words, that there should be love and understanding, peace and friendship. Page 161.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms.
Let's try together. Let there be love. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Ashkivenu Veshalom.
Let there be love and understanding among us.
Ashkivenu
Be our shelter from life's storms.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Ashkivenu Veshalom. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. Blessed are you, God. You spread your shelter of peace over us, our people, and all peoples. continue with the Amidah, which is on page 164. We'll begin with the first few blessings together, and then we'll have a moment also of silent prayer. Please rise.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agita hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Bekonei Hakol, V'zocher Chastei Avot ve'imahot, Umevi Gula livnei v'nehem, Lema'an Shemo be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshiach u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayei hakol atah rav le'oshia, Morid hatal, Mechokel chayim bechesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, Tomech noflim verofei cholim, Umatir asurim, Umekayim emunato, Lishenei afar, Vichamocha b'gevurot, Umidom elach, Melech memit umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshuam. V'ne'eman atah l'hachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, Ukedoshim b'chol yom yahallelu chasela. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh.
The Amidah continues through page 180. Feel free to continue at your own pace or find a prayer that catches your heart, or feel free to close your eyes and utter the prayer of your heart. Feel free to have a seat whenever you're ready. Hebrew word shalom, which so many of us have heard, has a root which means something like whole or complete. And is it any coincidence that the most fervent and repeated prayer in Judaism throughout our service is one for completeness, for fixing what is broken? Would that we could fix everything that is broken. But if we can't always do that, we know that praying and caring helps. And so we always take a moment to offer Misha Berach prayer for those in need of healing within our community. I'll share the names known to us from within our TBT family and also our loved ones. We think of our temple members, Amy Agranov, April D'Amato, Norma Diamond, Ken Gammerman, Henry Gettenberg, Marjorie Hart Glossband, Marcia Jacoby, Josh Lipschitz, Sabrina Maurer, Paula Retsky, and Shula Sturman. And also our loved ones, Marie Sammartino, Connie Ambrosino, Ellen Gilder, Rochelle Downheimer, Mickey Bart, Jay Fliss, Sue Yaris, Joanne Crisulo, Mark Ostreicher, Matthew Pincus, Bart Young, Marvin Goldberg, Paul Frisman, Marion Macon, Mark Potter, Martha Potter, Ben Peck, Martin Gluck, Dianette Kardach, Joan Sidney, Jack Woods, Michael Stafford, Ira Weiss, Peg Pig, and Drew Garabo. If there are others within our TBT community here tonight who would like to share the name of someone they're thinking of for healing and add them to our prayers, you are most welcome to do so. If you're on Zoom, feel free to add them to the chat at this time. And if you're here and you feel comfortable, you're welcome to say their name aloud. Is anybody praying for healing for someone tonight? Michael Sherwood? Joni Tucker? John Mark. Jack Goldstein. Jack Goldstein. Kadosh Baruch Hu Yamalei Rachamim Aleihem. May God's mercy find its way down to them, whether in their healing or in their comfort and care. And may all who care for them and all who love them be blessed. As we join our voices in a prayer of Misha Berach, which is on page 371. 371.
Misha
Bless those in need of healing with refuah.
think if I were to say that it's a great honor to introduce our scholar in residence to all of you, it would really not do justice to the feeling I am experiencing right now. It is not only a great honor to introduce Rabbi Danny Zemel, it is a personal joy and a privilege to have him and Louise here with us for Shabbat. Rabbi Zemel is someone who I am very lucky to call a mentor and a friend, both to Susan and myself. He is the senior rabbi of Temple Micah in Washington, D.C., and just out of curiosity, because I hadn't read it before, I went and looked up his bio on the Temple Micah website, which I'm not going to read, don't worry, or at least not read all of it. It says that he arrived at Temple Micah in 1983, and that he feels his primary role as a rabbi is grappling with the challenge of translating the inherited Jewish past into a theology and practice that speaks to today. I will say that that's probably the most humble possible explanation of his role, because not only did he arrive at Temple Micah in 1983, but he transformed Temple Micah between 1983 to today into a thriving, dynamic, visionary American synagogue. It's a place where people go to experience life's joys, to greet one another and do serious Torah learning, a place where they go to help change the world together. And it's always just a place of such joy and vivaciousness. So I feel very grateful for the time I was able to spend at Temple Micah. I know Susan feels the same way. And Rabbi Zemel has transformed it into what it is through the power of his vision. If I were to say only it's the power of his vision, though, that also wouldn't do justice to Rabbi Zemel. He also has a deep humanity. And to that extent, he teaches, along with our teacher, Rabbi Dr. Larry Hoffman, about the human project. The human project is this idea that the Jewish story is a uniquely powerful vehicle for connecting to the human story. Or I'll quote this so I won't get it wrong. It says, "The Jewish story is one of human history's longest running, powerfully dramatic and wise explorations of our shared humanity." In other words, at least as I understand it, and he'll correct me if I've gotten it wrong, which I very well might, there is something so powerful about the particularity of our faith that illumines the universality of what we are all trying to accomplish on this planet, that just lights a fire in the Jewish soul. And he is the teacher who makes me realize that. I'll share just one story of Rabbi Zemel before I turn over the microphone to him, because I could tell many. But when I was a fairly young professional, just out of college, he gave me the privilege of my first job. And one day, I screwed something up pretty badly. So he called me into his office, and I was expecting a little bit of a talking to. What I did not receive was a little bit of a talking to. What I received was him sitting down with me and telling me something from the Talmud. You see, one section of the Talmud teaches this idea that the definition of a tzaddik, of a righteous person, is one whose merits outweigh his or her misdeeds. In other words, if you were to imagine a cosmic scale, 51% of one's deeds are for merit. That alone considers somebody righteous. He told me that if he has a day where he feels like he did more good things than not good things, he feels like it was a success. And then he, of course, went on to tell me what I did wrong and how I should fix it. But the teaching was such a beautiful moment for me because it showed me so many things. It showed me his learnedness. It showed me his sensitivity and his deep care for my growth and for the ethical life that didn't have to come at the expense of some imagined perfection. It was a great moment of what I will call being a dugma ishit, a personal role model of what it means to be a rabbi. And so how lucky am I to stand here today with the opportunity to welcome my rabbi and mentor to our pulpit. Welcome, Rabbi Zemel.
Well, there are moments like that when I wish my mother were still alive, simply to have heard it. She would have been the only one who would really believe it. So, but then she would have corrected Danny a little bit as well. So, I cannot tell you how delighted I am to be here. Almost perhaps even more delighted than Rabbi Moss and Rabbi Moss, who I once knew as Rabbi Landau. Let me simply enjoy this moment for a moment. You've more than honored me by inviting me here. It is fair to say that you've created truly an Oneg Shabbat for my wife Louise and myself, a Shabbat of joy and delight. In inviting us into your community, you've allowed a reunion with two of our nearest and dearest in many, many ways. As you've heard, Rabbi Moss worked at Micah for 3 years after college before enrolling in rabbinical school. I'm grateful that his years with us did not scare him away from pursuing his chosen career path. His work with us was more than impactful. We saw a young man grow towards becoming a rabbi. In being here this evening, we see how those seeds are continuing to flourish. It is more than a joy. And I'll speak personally for just a moment. My own personal family is forever in your debt. I mean forever etched in our hearts for your gift that you gave to us in a very, very serious, important, and painful time in the life of my family. And you know that to which I refer. So simply always, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then this great young man goes and marries Rabbi Landau. Without knowing anything of their relationship, we invited Rabbi Landau to come join the Temple Micah staff upon our ordination from rabbinical school. And just to let you know what a prize Rabbi Landau was, we had well over 30 applicants for the position, and she was clearly the star of her ordination class. We were delighted to get her to come to Micah. The impression she left in our community is felt to this day. I have a boatload of greetings that I've already shared with you, people who remember your warmth with fondness and with love. So this weekend is a reunion gift. Finally, one other word before I really begin my remarks. I was just introduced as a scholar in residence. This is too much. I am not a scholar. I consider myself to be a lifetime student of Judaism, so call me then a serious student in residence. My remarks this evening are born out of a conviction that synagogues matter, and matter so greatly that no rich Jewish life is possible without them. And my thoughts are born also from a sobering realism about the climate in which we're operating. Liberal religion in all forms in this country, Jewish, Christian, you name it, is in decline. Check any Pew Research Center poll. I talk about this frequently because the director of religion of Pew Research is a member of Temple Micah. But ask Mark Chavez. You don't have to come to Temple Micah of Harvard. He is wont to say that to deny the decline in religious affiliation in this country is like denying global warming. You can do it, but you are simply wrong. Now, there may be individual bright spots. A particular congregation or community may be enjoying real vitality, but the overall numbers are down and they are declining. What then is my wisdom? What are our challenges? How do I think about this in my own little prism of my own little laboratory of Temple Micah? Like any good Jew of my past, I try to learn from the past. Marshall Sclair was the first sociologist to study American Jewish life with a degree of seriousness. Marshall Sclair began his academic career at the University of Chicago, then went on to study at Columbia University, and then he could not get an academic position because there is no university that offered someone with a PhD in sociology who was studying Judaism to teach at any university in the country. He went to be a researcher for the American Jewish Committee. Ultimately, years later, he went on to teach at Brandeis. But writing in the 1950s and 60s, Marshall Sclair called the synagogue, the American synagogue, an ethnic church. This describes the congregational environment of the baby boomer generation and the first wave move of synagogues to the suburbs. Jewish identity was for them assumed. European Jewish memories and the immigrant experiences were strong. Jewish life was instinctive, if not particularly religious. In the synagogue of my own youth in Chicago, the words belief, theology, spirituality were seldom, if ever, heard. I'm not sure that the rabbi I grew up with, a large conservative synagogue in Chicago, even ever heard himself the word spirituality. By the 1970s and 1980s, the synagogue, to use a phrase that I've created, had become an ethnic church. The comfortable home to so many had become synagogues is, this phrase I created is ethnic fortress. The ethnic church had become an ethnic fortress. Intermarriage is on the rise. Jewish population studies are now focused on measuring strength of Jewish affinity versus fear of assimilation. Jewish continuity became a rallying cry, a misplaced rallying cry if ever there was one, and synagogues became places for inoculation against the temptations of the outside world. Our Reform movement teacher and visionary, Rabbi Hoffman, saw all this and emerged as the leader, seeking to move the synagogue towards what he called a spiritual center. Now, a spiritual center is an open place. A spiritual center, by definition, has to be in conversation with the world around it because it wants a place of centrality. It doesn't want to be off in the corner as a fortress with walls around it. So a place that is central has to be open to the world around it. And this is the synagogue that in many places we are struggling to create today. This, I'm sure, is what animates your community here in Guilford. Now, how do we understand this struggle of creating and maintaining a vibrant spiritual center? What makes it spiritual, and what are its challenges? The current way we understand synagogue in order to be spiritually central has to change. It can't be a club. It can't seek to protect anything. It must somehow strive to be simultaneously fully Jewish while also open to the outside world. It has to be interactive. So to begin with, we need to understand the world in which we live. This secular age where people live perfectly happy lives with no God, with no faith connection, and no traditional mooring. We all know very, very, very happy people out there, successful people, wonderful people, friends of ours, with no God, no faith connection, no traditional mooring. So consider this story for what was for me from a very instructive book, a book I highly recommend, a long book, a hard book. There will be pages that you will read 2 or 3 times, a book called The Age of Atheists by Peter Watson. I turn to a story that he tells about Jürgen Habermas, one of this era's greatest philosophers. So I'm quoting now from Peter Watson. Quote, "Something had first occurred to Habermas after he attended a memorial service for his friend Max Frisch, the Swiss author and playwright. This memorial service was held in St. Peter's Church in Zurich, April 9th, 1991. The service began with Karen Pillode, Frisch's partner, reading out a brief declaration written by the deceased. It said," now this is what Frisch's partner read at the service, which Frisch himself had said, "This should be read at my funeral service." We quote, "We let our nearest speak, and without an amen. I'm grateful to the ministers of St. Peter's Church for their permission to place the coffin in the church during our memorial service. The ashes will be strewn somewhere." End of quote. Now to go on in the description of this funeral. 2 friends spoke, but there was no priest. There was no prayer. There was no blessing. The mourners were people who had little time for church or religion. Frisch himself had drawn up the menu for the meal that followed. Habermas wrote, after attending the service, it stayed on his mind, and so Watson goes on to describe that 17 years after attending this funeral, this totally secular funeral that was held in this church building, Habermas writes about it later. As the years passed, Habermas came to view that the form, place, and progression of the service were odd. He wrote, quote, "Clearly Max Frisch, an agnostic who rejected any profession of faith, had sensed the awkwardness of non-religious burial practices, and by his choice of place publicly declared that the enlightened modern age has failed to find a suitable replacement for a religious way of coping with the final rite of passage which brings life to a close." This is Habermas describing his friend's funeral. With no religious practice, something was missing from death ritual. The deceased realized that in placing his funeral in the church, yet with all other religious trappings absent, no prayer, no clergy, there was no spiritual core. Habermas, in attendance, felt the, quote, "something missing." That's what he wrote. There's something missing, and ruminated on it for years. Habermas tells his story himself as a totally secular, non-religious person, but he writes essay after essay that he's living a life with, quote, "something missing." Barbara Brown Taylor, a leading contemporary American Christian thinker, says much the same thing about this struggle when she writes in her own book, a book written just 5 years ago, quote, this is Barbara Brown Taylor, quote, "If I had $1 for every time I heard someone say I am spiritual but not religious, then I might not be any wiser about what that means, but I would be richer. People are usually trying to tell me that they have a sense of the divine depths of things, but they are not churchgoers or synagogue goers. Some of them have resigned from religions they once belonged to. How many of us know families that were members of a synagogue but leave the synagogue 3, 4, 5 years after the youngest child becomes bar and bat mitzvah? We know this world that Barbara Brown Taylor is writing about. Others have collected wisdom from the four corners of the world, which they use like cooks with a pantry full of spices. How many know people that do a little bit of yoga, a little bit of Buddhist meditation, they get a little bit of a Hindu book? How many? That is the world that we all live in. Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "I know what they mean by religious. It is the spiritual part that is harder to grasp. It may be the name for a longing, that there's a sense of something missing, to use Habermas's term, for more meaning, more feeling, more connection, more life." She goes on, "They know there is more to life than one meets the eye. They have drawn closer to this more in nature, in love, in art, in grief. They would be happy for someone to teach them how to spend more time in the presence of this deeper reality. But when they visit the places where such knowledge is supposed to be found, they often find the rituals hollow and the language antique." How many of us find that sometimes in our own Jewish religious life? The rituals hollow and the language antique. Taylor goes on, "Those who belong to communities of faith have acquired a certain patience with what is sometimes called organized religion." That's all of us. We have a certain patience with organized religion. We, after all, are here. They have learned to forgive its shortcomings as they have learned to forgive themselves. They do not expect their institutions to stand in for God, and they are happy to use inherited maps for some of life's journeys. I want to pause. This term, inherited maps for some of life's journeys. What is that? That's the prayer book you're holding in your hand. That's an inherited map for some of life's journeys. We use that inherited map when a couple gets married. We use that inherited map when we're praying for someone who's healing. There are things that we need to rise to, aspire to, and we use these inherited maps to guide our life's journey. We use this inherited map in the most obvious way. This is Shabbat, the most obvious thing. We call this the beginning of the seventh day of the week. But if we just pause, this is a human invention. If you're a tiger, there's no such thing as Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Shabbat. For the world of nature, time isn't differentiated. We've differentiated time, and we use an inherited map to create this ritual of Shabbat. All of the ritual objects, including the prayer book, that we as Jews use, we use to navigate life. Now, Emile Durkheim, the great French sociologist, Jewish sociologist of the early 20th century, and from this point on, Rabbi Landau Moss could give a lot of this talk because she's heard parts of this many, many times. Emile Durkheim, the great French Jewish sociologist of the early 20th century, descended from 12 generations of rabbis. But he was among the first to sense this situation that Habermas and Taylor explore. Durkheim held that a sense of the sacred was vital to the emotional health of every social order, any community. He saw that the breakdown of traditional village life in France and the move to cities would cause a kind of shattering of moral values and a rooted personal identity. He wrote of anomie, the sense of being kind of spiritually lost. Quote, "A society can neither create itself nor recreate itself without at the same time creating an ideal. The center of any collective identity is not instrumental functionality, but believed in ideals and images that are sacred, that are set apart, that are hallowed, that are protected, inviolable." End of quote of Durkheim. Following Durkheim's learning, I therefore ask myself, what are the, quote, ideals and images that are sacred for us, for American Jews today? What is our shared religious language that roots us, that connects us, that defines us? What is the religious language that inspires us? What religious practice or ritual reflect and embody our faith and our values? When and where do we experience down in our guts what we really believe? When does Judaism make our hearts soar? And when does Judaism make our hearts weep? And how can this American synagogue be this place? These are the questions that we must be asking. I believe that if our faith life is weak, I believe if the synagogue does not bring us out roaring and soaring or crying and weeping, it's because individually and community, our metaphors are weak. We are strangers to our own metaphors. In his seminal work, The Sacred Canopy, Peter Berger wrote that the pre-modern world lived with an implicitly religious environment that was everywhere, what Max Weber termed enchanted. There is no such thing as religion as a separate category of life. All of life was governed by a single set of rules. There is no sense of anything missing because the world was what the world was. The structure of the world was assumed to have a creator God with earth at the center. Charles Taylor points out in his work that it would have been nearly impossible, for example, in the year 1500 to find an atheist on the street. For Judaism, this world that was undifferentiated and whole, took the form of our rabbinic system of halakha, a totally, totally undifferentiated world that is governed by one set of rules. With the onset of modernity, religion became a separate category of life, a volunteer activity, if you will. And with the Enlightenment, this gave birth to what we call religion, no longer living under a sacred canopy. Faith now requires what I call a plausibility structure. This speaks to the weakness which we live in. What is a plausibility structure? I go back in time 25 years, 20 years to when my children were young. Try telling your children at a Shabbat and they have to stay home for Shabbat dinner. They open the door and outside for the world it is movie night, party night, football game night. The plausibility structure ends at the door to your house. A synagogue is a plausibility structure. There are other people doing Shabbat. There is a structure. That's why Jews need community, because without us, what is the plausibility structure? When my wife is out of town and I'm home alone on Friday night, that rare Friday night, I find myself asking, should I light the Shabbat candles just for me? Does God care whether I light the Shabbat candles? God doesn't need me to light the Shabbat candles. A plausibility structure needs a social fabric. By the way, I always light the candles even if Louise is not there. What we lack are enticing and seductive plausibility structures to make religion really real. The plausibility structures that we have work for some, like those of us who are here tonight, the weekly regulars, you know who you are, but they do not work for the majority. Our metaphors, you see, are weak. When you are inside a strong plausibility structure, a strong metaphor, anything is possible. Metaphors do that. One of my favorite examples in order to understand what I mean by strong metaphors and how we have to learn from the world around us. How many of you have heard of the Harry Potter book series? Raise your hand. Okay. So if you've all heard of the books, consider the following scenario. It is the year 1998, and I call to my 11-year-old daughter that it is time to get in the car. No response. I call again. No response. I go down the hall to her room where I see her lying on her bed reading. What are you doing? Don't you hear me calling? We have to get going. I see her fully absorbed in a book. I speak again in a louder voice. After a minute or so, she realizes that her father is standing at the door shouting, "We gotta get going." She pulls her head away from the book. What are you reading? Harry Potter. Now I have her attention. She's looking at me. I ask, do you really think there are such things as witches and wizards and magic potions and spells? My daughter replies, of course not. It's all pretend. Leave me alone. I want to go back to the book. Great literature creates a plausibility structure, a canopy that invites the reader in and creates a reality. This is what great art does. Fiction, theater, movies. We are on the edge of our seat because we are living in a very strong metaphor. Our Jewish religious life is weak because our metaphors simply do not resonate the way they once did. When we ask ourselves, does Kabbalat Shabbat really feel like an evening of romantic love with the Shabbat bride entering the space? On our high holy days, do we feel in our guts that God is a judge and arbiter and something in us is trembling in the balance? Maybe you are lucky and you do, but for way too many, our inherited Jewish metaphors require too much cultural translation. They don't bring us in. For way too many of us, we have the kind of patience with our inherited maps that Barbara Brown Taylor speaks of. For the doubters, one more word on metaphors or fictions. This one from Eric Kandel, the Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology in the year 2000. He created a new synthesis between the fields of brain studies, neuroscience, and mind studies, psychology. I read his book. I wrote him an email. He sent me with many questions. He sent me back an email with many answers. I sent him back an email with many questions. He sent me back an email with many answers. He said to me, "You're a curious guy." I said, "I am." Eric Kandel invited me to come visit him at his lab at Columbia University. I said, "I'm not smart enough, but I brought my study group of rabbis to come spend a day with Eric Kandel." I learned an enormous amount. As a medical school graduate, Dr. Kandel was completing his Harvard Medical School residency in psychiatry in the early 1960s. This is a true story. As a resident in psychiatry, he was already an MD doctor. He's completing his residency in psychiatry at Harvard. He attended a lecture by a neuroscientist on the chemistry of the brain that was held for psychiatry residents and fellows. After the lecture, Dr. Kandel approaches the lecturer, pointing to the model of the brain that the lecturer had used, and asks him, "Where in the brain is the ego and the id?" The neuroscientist looks at him in surprise and says to him, "There's no place in the brain where there's an ego and id. They are metaphors. The vocabulary we describe all the time. We live in a world of metaphors." Dr. Kandel then realized in order to be the kind of brain scientist he wanted to be, he had to go back and study the biochemistry of the brain. My point in all this is simply to emphasize how very real metaphors are and how we take them for granted in almost everything, but we have to think about them with a much greater degree in religion. What I'm saying, we need stronger metaphors. I'm saying we need an entirely new poetry, a new language that speak to us. The creation of a ritual life that defines us and inspires us, that takes us away, that brings us to a different place. What does it take for the entrance of Shabbat bride to feel real? What might our metaphors be? How can we reanimate these metaphors to help bring us to creating a spiritual center, the future American synagogue? We are, I believe, in need of new ways of both understanding and embracing the very building block words of our Jewish vocabulary. God, Torah, Israel. Any Jewish theology has to be centered on these pillars. I will spin an idea for you. God. We need to totally banish the notion of God as an old man with a beard. Banish it, lock it away in a storeroom in your brain, throw the key away, and make sure the storeroom has no windows. And also, think about banishing the notion of a God who acts in history by parting waters or sending divine messages. These images simply do not work for most of us. We must seek to disengage a desire to define or to understand. We need to simply be enveloped. Heed two pieces of wisdom that speak to a modern and approachable, believable metaphor for God. And here I will quote the French Catholic theologian Jean-Luc Marion. Quote, God cannot be seen, not only because nothing finite can bear his glory without perishing, but above all because a God that could be conceptually comprehended would no longer bear the title God. A God that can be conceptually comprehended can no longer bear the title God. God remains God only on condition that our ignorance be established and admitted definitively. Everything in the world gains by being known, but God, who is not of the world, gains by not being known conceptually. So we have to change our God definition. Stop asking about God concepts, right? Stop thinking about how can I understand God. God is that which is incomprehensible. Marion goes on. The idolatry of the concept is the same as that of the gaze. And what he means is, we all know that it's idolatry to look at a statue and pray to it. It's also an idolatry to think you can have a rational God concept that you can understand. You have to be willing to dance the dance of total metaphor, of being seduced by something that's created artistically in a space. Then when you leave it, you can be like my daughter says, I don't believe in wizards, but we have to create the magic. We have to create the jazz, the zoom that sizzles us in our heart. We cannot hold the God concept. We have to create metaphors that bring us into a different reality. Marcia Falk, perhaps our most gifted feminist liturgist, writes about this, quote, we must create new images to convey our visions, and to do so we must be patient, for images will not be called into being by sheer acts of will. Rather, we learn what artists know well, that authentic images rise from our unconscious as gifts that are out of our living, from our whole engaged selves with the sort of part of our communities, the images that serve us well will emerge. We must trust the journey, which means we must experiment and try different melodies, different poetry, all to create images that, oh, this one makes me vibrate. The religious person, in other words, is on a search journey, but knows not exactly what he or she is looking for until you know it. It's the difference between the Harry Potter books, which bring us in, and the pedestrian book that this is simply unbelievable. We're not going to bother to read it. Torah. The greatest wisdom that I can offer on Torah begins with an approach to our entire Hebrew Bible, from Genesis through to the last book of the last section, 2 Chronicles, for those of you that have read the entire Hebrew Bible from beginning to end. My beloved Bible teacher in rabbinical school, David Sperling, would rightly comment, I have read the Bible from cover to cover several times. Nowhere does it say based on actual events. The Bible is neither a history book nor a science book. It is simply and most centrally our book. But my understanding of what I mean by Torah incorporates much more. Torah is an attitude. Torah is an approach to all of life. That is what we have to get from reading our Torah. It is an approach to the entire lived life. I am reminded of the rabbinic stories, Talmudic no less. When I wanted to talk to the young Danny Moss, I couldn't be didactic. You bring a story. And the Talmud is filled with stories that envelop us. And when you think about it, only do you come to the point of the story. So, there is this student who hides under the rabbi's bed all night as his master is in bed with his wife. The sage, upon finding his student there in the morning, is incredulous, aghast, until he hears the student proclaim, Torahi alai lilmod. This too is Torah, and I must learn. This story is repeated as the student follows the sage to the privy, and again exclaims, this is Torah, I must learn. The way of Torah is the considered life, the understanding that life is a serious venture. We must think about that and take the notion that Torah is simply in a book. We have to explore the Torah of our lives and more. Torah then is the ability to see yourself in a narrative, a never-ending story, as a link on a chain, a holder of a certain way of being in the world. Torah is a posture, a way of entering in the world. Torah is my Torah, that Rabbi Landau once heard me say. Torah is Jews don't despair. Torah is Vaclav Havel's wisdom on hope. Havel writes, quote, hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. Hope is not a prognostication, it's an orientation of the spirit. To be a Jew is to know Odlo Avda Tikvatenu. We have not yet lost our hope is not only the national anthem of the state of Israel, it is our mantra. And this kind of thinking has to inform our metaphors. This is what Torah is. And finally, our third pillar, who is Israel? This is critical, but my answer, you'll be thankful, is shortest. We are in a post-ethnic age of multiple identities. I would love to see us open the doors of Israel to the world around us. Because that is the way, Rabbi Moss, that is the Jewish project. That is the human project, is the Jewish project. That's who we are. My teacher, Rabbi Hoffman, has suggested that in this era of multiple identities, we should understand being Jewish as someone who participates in what he terms the Jewish conversation. The depth to which you are participating in the conversation determines the depth or primacy of this part of your identity. But with this approach, Rabbi Hoffman is attempting to move the conversation of who is a Jew past the simple binary of Jewish, non-Jewish. It widens our thinking about what we mean by the word identity. We seek a Judaism that is an open door for anyone who wishes to drink from our well, anyone who wishes to participate in the Jewish conversation. The first words of the Jewish conversation are words of creating the entire human story. The Jewish story, what we call the Jewish story, is simply our way of how to be a human being in the world. We have a particular knowledge that is open to the world. It's not just limited to our club, and we should stop thinking ourselves as a club. So in conclusion, the Zohar teaches God, Torah, and Israel are one. So our metaphors for God must inspire our spirits. Our interpretations of Torah need to expand our understanding of a considered life, and our definition for Israel need to incorporate how we view and answer the question, who is Israel? Let us invite our artists to offer us a new rich vocabulary aimed at a vibrant life of faith. Let us embrace Torah wherever we find it, and may it strengthen the way we understand our journey, and may we be inspired by Isaiah, so our houses of prayer will be in conversation with the world around us, open and eager for anyone who wishes to enter our doors. Shabbat Shalom.
What a powerful opening to a conversation that Rabbi Zemel is inviting all of us to participate in actively. And in order to hear some of the details of what that looks like over the next 2 days, I'd love to invite Donna Fettis to please greet us on behalf of our congregational leadership. Donna, as I mentioned before, along with Jill Lesage and Gary Damiano, helped make this weekend possible with so much labor and so much love. So grateful, Donna, that you're greeting us tonight.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. A warm welcome to guests we have with us tonight. My name is Donna Fettis, and I'm co-chair of programming with Jill Lesage on the board of directors at TBT. Tomorrow, join us on Zoom for a special Torah study at 9 a.m., led by our scholar in residence, Rabbi Daniel Zemel. The topic is On the Struggle to Have Faith. At 10 a.m., we'll hold Shabbat services at the Rothberg home as we celebrate Gabby Rothberg becoming a bat mitzvah. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., join us for a very special event of our Scholar in Residence weekend, a sip and schmooze at the Guilford Community Center with Rabbi Zemel. The interactive workshop will be called Stories of Redemption and Faith, and everyone is encouraged to bring a personal or ritual object from home that will be incorporated into the evening. So I'm curious about that. Even if you haven't RSVP'd, there's still room, so just let me or Jill Lesage know, and there's still room for you to come. We do ask that everyone take a COVID test before they attend, and we have some tests here tonight. If anyone needs one, you can let us know. Next Friday, join us back here on the green at 6:30 for a Shabbat service, and the first Shabbat on the beach of the season is scheduled for July 15th, so save the date for that, and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
And congrats.
Our hearts turn now to a place of memory as we recall all those whom we have lost in recent days or at this season in years gone by, including within our congregational family, Alan Rosenthal, father of Josh, Michael, and Max Rosenthal, and the sons of TBT members Emily and Richard Skolnick, and most recently, Joan Marcus, wife of Joel Marcus, just completing the period of Shiva. If I read the name of your loved one for their yahrzeit, feel free to stand if it's comfortable for you and remain standing. Selna Deach, Betty Gallagher, Stella Bagish, Herbert Gubitz, Clara Babenko, Howard Fausti, Pauline Grable, Richard Karamanis, Ruth Whalens, Bernard M. Iber, Martin Brill, and Joseph Panashi. If there are others saying Kaddish tonight, I invite you, if it's comfortable, please share the name of your loved one. You can also, of course, hold them in your heart. If you're with us tonight on Zoom, you can enter their name into the chat at this time as well, if you would like. Anyone saying the morning's Kaddish tonight? I invite us all, if it's comfortable, to please rise in solidarity with our mourners as we recognize all those among our people who are also standing in solidarity to share these words, hallowed by time. Page 598, 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Be'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yeh shmei Rabbah mevorach le'alam u'le'almei amaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudesha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, v'yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace and comfort bring both peace and comfort to the hearts of all who mourn. As together we say, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, v'yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. We can have a seat. I would love to invite now our scholar and his wife, Rabbi Zemel and Louise Zemel. Please come up for a Kiddush and Motzi. I'm sure they're very eager to meet you if they haven't already, and to see you tomorrow for a Torah study and for that special interactive sip and schmooze is what we called it, right, Jill? Sipping and schmoozing. Is that right? Right? Yeah. Can't wait for that. Food and Jews. The things they, yes, we do. Yes. Good, good. Eloheinu melech haolam, Bei peri agafen, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'atzavanu, V'shabbat kodsho yavav ratzon yichilanu, Zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit, Ki hu yom techila lemikra'e kodesh, Zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, Ki vanu v'acharta, V'yatanu kidashtam mikol ha'amim, V'shabbat kodshecha v'uvratzon hinchaltanu. Shemon. Amen. Lechaim. Motzi lechem min haaretz. B'tei avon. Shabbat shalom. Thank you. Well, it's been wonderful to be together tonight, and a wonderful experience and so much wisdom shared. Deserves a wonderful song to end. Was that a kiss on the ground? Yes. I think there was a great song in the 90s, Kiss from a Rose, remember? Seal. You could literally pluck a kiss from a rose out here. Okay, Cantor, what's it going to be?
We're going to do verses 1, 2, and 5 of Adon Olam on page 625.
625.
Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, Liet Nasa, B'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam, Ve'acharei Kichot HaKol, Levado Yimloch Nora Adon Olam, Ve'hu Haya, Ve'hu Hoveh, Ve'hu yeh b'tifara Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, Liet Nasa, B'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam, Be'yado Afkid Ruchi, Be'iti Shan Ve'a'ira Adon Olam, Be'im Ruchi Geviyati, Adonai li ve'lo ira Adon Olam, Adon Olam,
Adon Olam,
Asher Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, Liet Nasa, B'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam.
After Rabbi Zemel's remarks tonight, I don't think that I can ever say, may God bless our people with peace, and think about it so simply ever again. But nevertheless, I will say it. Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless our people and all people with peace. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.